So, Malik, we're back this time talking self control,
Okay, your favorite topic.
one of my all time favorite subjects. You're right.
Exactly. I think where all the things started and they continue to be
Very much. I don't think it's
at the
something we can
center,
actually
yeah, of your
get away
practice.
from. Is self control is one of those things that I describe as being the trans success factor. In other words, if anybody aims to achieve anything in life, it's going to require self control. So it doesn't matter what it is, whether it's athletic performance or relationship or professional. It doesn't matter. A person has to be able to act consistently in line with their better judgment in order to bring about the things that they're hoping to bring about. Or so, at least that's my opinion.
Well, your opinion is being shared by across centuries. I think it's volume of knowledge on self control, self regulation, self discipline is enormous.
Mm,
You just have to Google any of these keywords, and you're gonna get huge amount of information from videos. And they are fun enough with the stoicism coming forward for the last few years very strongly. I think they're coming even more, and they're bringing all philosophers and all that. So there is no lack of why, how, and most people intuitively understand in everyday life, even if I never even gave them this, that keeping up with better decision making and kind of forgetting about long term, kind of giving to the long term goals rather than short term pleasures and impulses will give them a better results. And so we still keep talking about it. And your practice is still very much, emphasizing this, and you have daily questions about it. So why
yeah.
are we still talking about it? And above all, why are we continuously struggling with this? Mm, yeah, so let's start from there.
Maybe to bring into in terms of what you're saying right now, in a previous conversation we had had, the question
Yeah,
was, if we know so much about self
yeah.
control and we know how valuable it is as a skill, and I consider it to be a skill, why is it that we're still struggling?
Exactly.
And the answer is quite simple: because people haven't changed. Really, we haven't changed fundamentally. From the beginning, we are and have been wired in pursuit and preservation of maximal satisfaction. In other words, we want to experience things in the best possible way, if possible, all the time. So the question really comes down to a matter of, if we have limited resources of time and energy and money and help and those kinds of things, but we've got multiple opportunities for satisfaction. Some of those opportunities sort of now, and some of those opportunities down the line. But when an opportunity down the line has to come at the expense of something pleasurable now, that's a tension in the
Yeah.
thinking. And that is, in essence, what self control comes down to. It's the capacity to act in line with one's better judgment. In other words, to do what is either best or most favorable in terms of self control, in terms of greater value. So if there is something more valuable for me down the line, but it means I've got to sacrifice something now, whether it be an opportunity or a resource, but in my mind, I can weigh those things up and say, that's the better choice, then that is what we would consider the exercise of self control, foregoing something instantly pleasurable for sake of something more valuable down the line, or doing something right now that I don't particularly feel like for sake of something more valuable down the line. I think traditionally that's what we would look at and say that would be the exercise of self control, or some people would describe it as willpower, whatever terminology we're using.
So, Janmin, obviously, the first thing is clearly this is a skill, because if it was not, we'll be talking about it so
Yeah,
much.
it's something
So,
we can develop.
yes,
Absolutely.
yes. Otherwise, so many of us wouldn't be looking for all this YouTube. It's like, how am I going to do it?
Yeah.
Because we know what we should be doing, and we are not doing it. But it's something that you mentioned now, and I just want to pull apart this distinction. So, sacrifice,
Hmm.
I think working with a willpower and sacrifice is not going to be sustainable. Like self regulation or self control or self discipline that is based on purely sense of self, some kind of sacrifice continuously, which is a negative feeling. we are not seeing it as something that will carry us forward and the way we would like to, meaning we would like to enjoy and we feel that the choices we are making are rewarding down the line in some way. So this is a great distinction maybe we can talk about where what is really effective self-regulation based on.
So I think, again, to your point there, I was describing self-control as a particular act, but the reality is success usually is going to come down to, having good information, a few good decisions, and a lot of perseverance. So that little summary is how I usually describe what's required to achieve some level of satisfaction down the line, some level of success down the line. And really, it comes down to the continuity of being able to exercise self control repeatedly, which in and of itself actually poses a problem because, as with most things in life, it's energy dependent. And when we consider that each act of self control pretty much depletes brain energy to the point where subsequent acts of self control become increasingly less likely. And I always use this kind of analogy. I would say, say there's something, if I were to go back in time when a lot of my focus was on exercising self control for sake of achieving a look, feel, and function, a weight loss or a level of fitness, it would relate to I'm probably going to have to give up on certain things that I would like to eat in the moment because if I eat those things repeatedly, they are going to end up taking me away from my goal. So I would always use this sort of a cookie analogy and say, you know, if eating the cookie is not part of my plan, um, but the cookie is something I really, really feel like in the moment, if there's no cookie there, it's less of a problem because there isn't really the opportunity. But if the cookie is there, now I actually have to choose not to eat it. But I know that it's satisfying, and that pursuit of maximal satisfaction says, well, why wouldn't we eat the cookie? I mean, it makes total sense. It's right there. Eat it. It's guaranteed to give you, the satisfaction you're looking for. So take it. No, but if I eat the cookie now, that's going to prevent me from achieving my goal 3 months, 6 months, a year from now. Now I have the tension. And again, the self-control is the capacity to act in line with what is going to be ultimately better for me. One of the ways I would often describe this for a person while I was unpacking that was if I offered you the cookie right now, or I offered you the body and the health and the fitness right now, I click my fingers, you can pick either one, you can have either one. Nobody chooses the cookie.
Of course.
Nobody chooses the cookie. And yet, that same person, that afternoon or that evening finds themselves choosing the cookie. And it's simply because of this. What's happening in the thinking, what's happening in the mind and brain is you've got these two neural circuits that are competing. I describe them again, if you listen to anything that I say, miss or fuss. My instant satisfaction seeker, it's that part of my brain that is aimed at how can I get satisfaction now? It's got little concern for future or consequence. And the other part of my brain, which is the one that takes a long time to develop, is saying, hang on a second, let's be careful about what we're doing right now, because down the line, there may be consequences and it may get in the way of something much more valuable. Successfully losing weight and being fit and healthy is infinitely better than a single cookie. But when faced with that decision, when the potential for the weight loss down the line is it's a long time away, I failed multiple times, there's no guarantee I'm going to get it. The brain, the mind, the thinking in pursuit of maximal satisfaction says, satisfaction pursuit is cumulative. I'd rather have the cookie now rather than having no cookie and no weight loss. So oftentimes we give in to the idea, not even that it's conscious necessarily, but if I can accumulate multiple small things along the way, that's going to make me happy as opposed to I'll forego multiple small things along the way for sake of something much bigger down the line. Again, the moment there's time and the moment there's effort, it makes it very, very difficult to give up on something, especially if it's guaranteed and it's something that I've experienced in the past that I really like. Very difficult to give up on that for sake of something that I'm not certain is going to happen. And, all of a sudden, weighing those two things up, which again, side by side in the moment, you can't even compare. All of a sudden now this is becoming a much more difficult decision because as I'm thinking about it, I can't actually see the advantage of one over the other when there is risk and where there is cost to get the one down the line when this one is like right now. So even in that discussion with the cookie, so we happen to say no first up. No, I don't want the cookie. I'm focused on the weight loss down the line. And somebody 5 minutes later offers us again. And the second time is no. But this time I might have a little closer look at it. How is it? Is it nice? Is it good? And I'm almost building a case for myself as to why it is that I can actually have the cookie. And usually my mind and brain are going to tell me you can have both. Have the cookie now and exercise harder later, and then you can get the best of both worlds. But the point is, every time I have to say no to that cookie, it's depleting brain energy, brain resources, which are going to basically put me into the position where at some point I'm going to give in. And the more I've resisted something, to only give in, it actually sets me up down the line to say, why would I resist when I'm going to give in anyway? So we actually erode self-control through a sense of, well, I'm going to fail anyway. So I may as well take what is on offer right now instead of have to sacrifice or miss out on something for sake of, again, something that's not going to be worth it at the end of the day. There's so much to unpack even in that component that I've given right now. But the bottom line is you've got competing neural circuits with different outlooks in terms of what satisfaction is, and both heavily dependent on resources, energy to be able to go ahead and make a case for what's ultimately best. Self-control becomes difficult for many, many reasons. One of those being, again, the depletion of energy with every act of self-control.
Okay, so as I listen to that, obviously, the conflict is between the satisfaction that I think cookie will give, between the satisfaction of some long-term goal.
Yes.
So if I can switch and then put the volume down on the cookie and move that dial up on term, there wouldn't be a conflict, right?
What's interesting is what you point out there is one of the reasons why people who are using a goal to motivate try and tell people think about the most brilliant or unbelievable goals that you can imagine, because they're trying to do exactly that. They're trying to say it's going to be so worth it down the line. So I amp up the value of the success and the satisfaction of the goal. And I say, listen, the cookie is not that satisfying comparatively. The problem is, the more the brain fatigues, the less likely it is to buy that particular amping up and dialing down in an attempt to give the advantage of one over the other, which is why I say a goal is not a great motivator of self-control, certainly not one that is going to be sustainable, because the brain, that part of the brain, the thinking, easily discounts future value when, again, I have to wait or I have to work. So, in the discussions that we're going to have over self-control, we'll give insight into how it is that we actually develop the kind of self-control to do what's necessary to achieve the goal without the goal being the actual motivation in and of itself. And that is what I would typically refer to as the trick.
Okay, so why we don't talk about the trick now? Why you're keeping us on the edge of the
I think
chair?
there's so much more to talk about with regards to
Okay.
self-control.
So we said it's a skill.
Mhm.
A lot of factors influence development of this skill. So we can talk about when are we genetic factor. Is there a difference between us in terms of how easily it comes to some of us and so we can kind of add the sense that we're not equal in all of this. For some, it's more difficult than we see in the community. If you ever follow ADHD community, I mean, you will know that they will say that the impulses and just to act on impulse and regulate the emotions and the movement itself is so much more difficult and almost fighting your own body in itself. So there's definitely a component of difference. Have you seen this in your practice as well?
Of course, you're 100% correct. The same way that some people jump more easily than another, the same way that some people run faster than others, the variances or the variability that we have in individuals in many skills. Some people just take to music more easily than other people. Some people, again, take to um, just reading and understanding, those kinds of differences definitely play a role. So the fact is, you're going to have some people who would be able to exercise self control naturally more easy than somebody else. But that doesn't mean, same as with other skills, the person who it comes most naturally to will end up being the person who utilizes the skill best. Very often, what you'll have is the person who may struggle, the ADHD person, the person who is heavily given to the distractions of the sensory world, right? They're always looking. Part of the reasons why people are always looking for opportunity through senses is because of the pursuit of maximal satisfaction, and the current thing that they're engaged in isn't offering sufficient. So alert through what I hear and what I see and what I smell and what I feel is I'm continually on the lookout for something better, right? That's one of the fundamental underlying things that, again, may be part of the wiring and may be part of the actual, sort of nurturing process, especially if self-control is not well, sort of supported and developed. That person naturally is given to a more and more impulsive type of behavior because the gratification doesn't last. So I need something else and I need something else. And again, using that amped up term, they need to amp up all the time. The bottom line is some people are going to find it a little easier than others, and some people are going to find it a bit more difficult. Both can improve on what they've been given in terms of naturally. So there's absolutely no question. We could look at it and say, well, it's not fair or it's not this. Well, it isn't about necessarily fairness. Everybody got the same, sort of thing. It's a matter of what can you do to make the most of what you've got. And that would be my encouragement to anybody. Be less concerned about the fact that you're not going to be able to run 100 meters under 10 seconds. If running fast is something you need to do, then let's develop the skills that you can, whether that means you run it in 14 seconds or 16 seconds. As long as it's as fast as you can go, it's going to serve you best.
So, how early can we start working on it? I mean, as a parent, I mean, you're a parent, I'm a parent. We see that, school demands also this self-regulation that children just have to study and do homework like all of us. And
Yeah.
there's and then we see a lot of challenge there. And so how early can we go and how much environment? How should we really worry about the environment our kids are exposed? And what is that right now making it even more difficult, this skill to be early on emphasized, encouraged, or nurtured?
I would say to you that, again, as soon as there is the capacity to make any causal association, in other words, um, I experience something in response to something, I do something and I experience something, which is happening from very, very young,
That's true.
from even as a baby. Now, we're not going to get complicated there, but we are going to say that one of the reasons why we instruct children in a particular way through no or through stop or through things that are protective for them is because they don't have that wiring that is able to, at that particular point in time, understand long-term consequences. Just they're naive in many respects in that way. So the capacity to start developing self-control comes very early on, where the person is able to understand that when I'm told no, if I continue doing this, something is going to be unpleasant. And when a person is, whether we call that discipline or, however we discourage a particular kind of behavior or encourage another kind of behavior, we are inevitably drawing on this capacity to exercise self-control. So from very, very young. And what you'll find is the more that that is sort of nurtured, the more quickly that self-control develops. And the more quickly it develops, the more it develops. So you might find is one sort of is impulsive and there isn't the kind of correction and training in that declines very rapidly into a very horrible situation, whereas possibly somebody else who is being nurtured and corrected, that can develop and compound very, very quickly. Now, to your point on the environment, I think it's entirely possible, and we see this with children who say, this child, until they were 8 or 9 or 10 years old, they were just the model child. And then all of a sudden, it's like out of nowhere, this kid just completely lost the plot because the pursuit and preservation of maximal satisfaction is governed by perspective. So when the world, through social media or through screen time or through movies or books or friends or whatever else, every single thing we as people Hear, see, smell, taste, feel is going to be interpreted, every single part, as this is an opportunity or this is a threat. So when we start exposing young minds, young brains to the kinds of things that they cannot process, but gives them an instant satisfaction, right? We are opening them up to the kind of impulsive behaviors that inevitably carry significant consequence. So usually it's the kinds of things that give a dopamine hit cheaply: screen time, substances, those kinds of things. Well, they're appealing just by virtue of the fact that they are appealing. And if the pursuit of maximal satisfaction is what's driving us, then why wouldn't I want that? Why wouldn't I want to get something instantly? Well, because somebody told us that it's not good for you. For when? For when you're going to be an adult. I always say this to parents, when you're trying to deal with helping a child develop self control, talking to them about the future is irrelevant to them. They do not have the brain development or the brain capacity to understand causal association that has big gaps. So to tell a child, for example, do this because it's going to serve you 3, 4, 5, 6 years from now, that temporal horizon, that distance into the future, it doesn't register for them, which is part of the trick in terms of the way in which we learn to develop self control. Ironically, is we need to try and get that impulsive part of the brain working for us rather than against us. So I'll throw it on the end here. It's, that we're going to have many of these discussions, I hope. But the bottom line is a goal, which is inevitably a satisfaction that I'm looking for, that I have to wait or work for, or both. That is oftentimes something that's very helpful for us to set our direction in terms of our choices, in terms of where we're going to give our time and energy. But a goal in and of itself is a horrible motivator, certainly not the kind of motivation that's going to withstand the temptation of the instantly appealing things that typically take us away from successfully achieving what we want. I know, when I started saying this 15 years ago, even further, 16, 17 years ago, a goal is a poor motivator. People were stunned, the people I was speaking to. What do you mean? I thought the whole thing was about goals. I said, when you understand what's happening within the thinking, within mind and brain, and you think that somehow your brain is going to buy the idea that something way down the line is going to be satisfying enough to give up on all of these instant satisfactions, you're sadly mistaken. Now, for the odd person, and I don't mean odd as in strange, for the
Fair.
individual who is able to see something in the future so strongly that they can almost feel it now, maybe that person's goal will be sufficient. But even them, I would venture to say, if I had the opportunity to sit with them, I'll find that their continuity of the exercise of self control is not for the goal, it's for other reasons. They just do what's required consistently enough to succeed. And when they find the satisfaction of the goal, they might turn around and say, this was always my
But I
motivation.
think for me, it's interesting to ask from how did you form the goal and from where did the goal come from?
Mm.
So, what are you attaching the goal to? I think that's very important. So, if I'm doing the goal so I can have external like success or money or I avoid punishment, all of this or recognition, I don't think these are long term sustainable actually rewards. I think there has to be something far deeper. I think that's what we are probably discussing here. So
Yeah, absolutely.
goal that is attached to probably more external
Well, what are
rewards,
most people's goals? Think
it's a
about it.
success. I mean, it's obviously success. And I think the way we define the success is a question mark here for me. That's very important. So that awareness, what I should be kind of locking my goal with, that is fueling it consistently and adjusting. And, so the goal is a part of what? As to achieve what? I mean, if it's just, so the goal can be part of a bigger mastery and skill development or autonomy or all of these things that are much deeper kind of source of motivation to me than what I would say a transient success that is in line with a trend or superficial outside, social validation or which are obviously quite moody and you constantly have to readjust and they don't have consistency that you would like to sustain you long term. So I think this is probably where the real value is when we discuss of intrinsic rather than extrinsic motivational factors.
Yes, absolutely. So if you think about even what we had on Monday night when we did a Mind Map
Yes,
Monday,
yes,
right? One of the things that I was explaining was, let me explain to you what's involved in terms of achieving success, right? We need to be informed, we need to be aware, we need to be intentional, and we need to be repetitive. That's how we
yes,
grind our way or move our way or maintain momentum to achieving what we want to achieve. And success, by definition, is I achieved what I set out to achieve. And at the end, I said, well, what happens if you've exercised all the self control? You've really acted in line with your better judgment. You've followed your plan and you've succeeded and you're not satisfied. That is to your point where many people today, the kinds of goals that they pursue relate to the very, very, things that they assume are going to bring them satisfaction, which very often don't deliver. Firstly, because they don't get there, because the goal was not sufficiently motivating for them to keep going for as long as they needed to actually succeed. Or even if they got there, it's not enough. What's more? What else? And that brings you to those intrinsic components. So I believe that self control is best rooted in the kinds of things that are convictions, convictions about identity, who I am, what my roles and responsibilities are, convictions in terms of my morality, my beliefs, my values, and convictions in terms of my relationships. Those are the kinds of things that are where we need to anchor the kind of motivation to do the things that are required for success down the line, or to do the kinds of things that reassure me that I am the person that I want to be, that I am the person in this relationship and fulfilling the role that I am, aiming to fulfill. These deeper intrinsic things are really the things that we need to hook the actions required for success to, because again, unfortunately, the world has basically been, I think, presenting for so long now that dream big, have these amazing goals. You picture yourself with all this money, picture yourself with
yeah.
all the things that you want. And here's the bottom line, right? If, so people think, we are inclined to think, if I have all the money and the power, guess what I have? I have access to all the satisfaction I want. Unfortunately, it doesn't usually end up like that, which is why, in many respects, so many people in pursuit of goals usually fail. But even when they succeed, I've sat with those people many times who've achieved phenomenal things. And when you're raw and you're open and you're honest, they'll say to you, they don't bring the kind of satisfaction that I was hoping for. So well directed self control is what will ultimately bring the kind of success that is satisfying. So self control in and of itself, essential to success. Well directed will determine whether the success is likely to be satisfying or not. And that's a whole other discussion, right? What we're trying to do here is we're trying to bridge the gap between a plan and the action that brings about the outcome we're looking for. And I think that that is a big gap that most people
So I'm
struggle
gonna
with.
pick up on something. Obviously we need self-control to exercise whatever we plan, but then
Yes,
before that we have to discuss how well we are thinking. So how good thinkers we are because we're
fair.
making decisions, right? And we're
Yes.
making that plan.
Yeah.
And this is why that introspection about what really I should be locking what is really going to my plan? How good I'm thinking about it? Why am I doing that big why? Why am I doing this? What am I trying to accomplish? And I think the deeper question of purpose really, and maybe, not thinking about something out of ourselves, really. Quite often we find, and this is what I wanted to ask you, those people who accomplish on that
Mm,
superficial, when you look from outside, they
mm.
look like they have it all, but they're not happy. Why are they not happy? Do they have this awareness? And is it that why they're not happy? They couldn't develop that awareness to kind of shift the way they function, earlier on. So what do you help them see?
Oftentimes the people, and again, I have the privilege of sitting with people who are tremendously by worldly standards successful. In other words, they have lots of money. They're in positions of prominence. They can pretty much buy and get anything that the world has on offer to them that are satisfying. And usually they've tried it. Usually they have done pretty much everything, right, that is going to give them a sensory satisfaction. And what they end up finding is that, well, the position itself, the money itself, even though they don't want to necessarily give up on it, hasn't delivered what they had expected when they set out to make the money or arrive at that position. So the bottom line is a lot of these people come to the realization that the genuinely more satisfying things in life are the things they've often had to sacrifice in order to get to the positions or have the sort of resources that they thought would then end up delivering. So, back to your point, I think we need to have a better understanding of the realities of life. Where is genuine satisfaction to be found? I think those are the things that contribute to the few good decisions that I describe as being necessary, that have to basically guide the actions and the perseverance in those actions to bring about the success that we're typically looking for. The bottom line is, I think the world does the job of selling money and power and a lot of the sensory satisfactions as being the ultimate success in terms of finding happiness and excitement and safety and security and all of those things. And I think we've been around long enough to know that we seem to fall into the same trap over and over, but very, very seldom does it ever truly deliver. And that's just because that's not how we're designed. The design is different. The design is we are designed to basically find satisfaction in giving, in caring, in fulfilling responsibilities, in being useful, in being creative, in adding meaning to the world, to basically live, as I would say, in line with what God has given us to live in line with. Now, I never press that on anybody specifically because I know that you know there are many people who would not even consider. They'd hear me say what I've just said, and they'd be like, "Oh, switch off." If he's talking about God or supernatural things. Well, yeah, I believe in those kinds of things. I absolutely do, and I live by them. But I always consider that the pursuit of satisfaction that I deal with most people is satisfaction under the sun. In other words, in this world, pursuing the kinds of things that they want to experience, whether physically or emotionally or relationally. So I oftentimes am going to say the design remains the same. The design is exactly the same. We generally find greater satisfaction when we are consistent with our values. We generally find greater satisfaction when we act consistently with what we consider our purpose to be. We typically find greater satisfaction when we are faithful in relationships, right? When we live with integrity. The problem is a lot of those things seemingly get in the way of the kinds of instant satisfactions that we typically find available to us, whether it be in food or whether it be in, alcohol or, intimacy or anything else. The bottom line is, this took a course that I wasn't specifically expecting in the conversation, but these are the conversations I want to have. The bottom line is, I think we are poorly informed when we're young to believe that in order to find great satisfaction and happiness in life, I need to make lots of money and be in a position where I am master of my own destiny and basically can get and buy and control things in a way to get what I want. Unfortunately, it does not deliver. I'm not saying don't pursue goals. Anybody who knows me will know that that's not what I'm saying. I am saying think carefully about what you choose to pursue. And then if you're clear that this is what I want and it's a good thing, then pursue it with everything you've got. Absolutely. Go for it. But be thoughtful along the way.
So before we use the tool of self-control, obviously it
Mm.
seems like it's a tool.
It is. I actually love that. I think
Makes
absolutely it's very
we
much a
need to
tool.
do some groundwork on building the right values,
Mm.
becoming a better thinkers. I think there's obviously some introspection that needs to be done, you know, and asking ourselves why. So there's a great awareness that needs to be built and catching ourselves and then having that third eye, obviously, that when we see when that conflict is and to remind ourselves to have the reminder, to have that thoughtfulness of, I can see what is happening. I know why, because I'm a human. This is part of my design. I also don't have forgetfulness about who I am, why I do this. So, and I think that can become a habit. This is something you and I discuss. That while initially you do it with such an intention and effort, over time it becomes also who you are, someone who questions, someone who asks,
Yeah.
someone who understands humanity as it is, someone who understands the fragility of a human thinking, fragility of your body and the mind and all of this and how environment. And it's interesting how you can accept this and still navigate and not lose the core. You can almost hold the wheel at all times while the road is changing. You still have that sense of control. I think that's probably what is interesting, and I'm hoping we're gonna pick up actually more on a personal note. Obviously, you developed it quite well, and I wanted to somewhere start when not only how you have practiced it, but also how do you start with someone in the practice. I think that's
Yeah.
quite interesting because I know you do it so well and successfully. So obviously now we know why it's important, but where do we start and how do we start assess the starting point? And where is that domino that collapses most effectively the further down wherever you're going with that practice at home or in life?
Part of why, even when you said, when we were starting the discussion on the self control, you said, you want to have a look through the list of questions. And I say to you always, I don't want to see them.
Okay.
The reason I don't want to see them is because I want the discussion to flow. That's the nature of what I want to do here, because that's what I do in consultation. That's what I do whenever I'm speaking with people. So even what you've gone ahead and said now, my approach when I sit down with anybody, as I say this to them, very, off the bat, I meet them for the first time, I always ask, how are you? I genuinely want to know how you are, right? Because it's going to give me a lot of insight as to how I'm going to approach this particular first visit. I say to them, I'm not your judge. I know categorically I am no person's judge, right? And I say to them, I'm not going to tell you what to do. So when it comes to the informing a person as to what is likely to bring about, a particular outcome that I think is important, I never impose that on anybody. My intention is always to say to them, I'll show you how to understand yourself, the people around you, the understanding of the world and how things impact, what really makes us happy and what really doesn't. I'll show you those things. What you choose to do with them are up to you. And my hope is usually this: by helping them to develop the tool of self control, that they actually achieve what they set out to achieve. And then they say, I achieved it, but there's something missing, something else. That is what opens the door to discuss the kinds of things that say, well, what is more important in life? What are the things that are genuinely meaningful? And I've found over many, many years that by helping a person achieve what they think is going to be satisfying, and if it is satisfying, wonderful. We achieved what we said. That's my goal, is to help them. Um, but when they achieve those things, and normally when we've had opportunity to work through those things, that is when the relationships develop, where we actually have the opportunity to share perspective that goes beyond an approach, beyond a methodology. And at the end of the day, that is where I think that things are most valuable. It's very, very difficult to sit down with somebody who you don't know and tell them, you should, you should, you should. You know me well enough to know that is not what I think is a helpful approach to anybody. What I think is a good approach is, let me show you how to achieve success, whatever it is that you define that to be. And when you've achieved it, okay, and it maybe isn't all you thought it was cracked up to be, then let's have some further discussions. So in principle, that's why I don't go into that part of the discussion, which could easily become now the topic of the conversation. Well, let's discuss all the, the deep underlying kinds of things that relate to, humanity and purpose and all those things. The reason I don't have those discussions is this is not the platform. I have those discussions in other areas. For me right now, it's, let me show you how we think, mind and brain, and the kinds of things that bring about, successfully achieving goals. So that really is the focus of perspective for life as it is here.
You want to end on that?
Yeah, I think so. And then we'll continue with self-control on other things. But I hope that that's clear. I mean, you know me well enough to know exactly what I mean by that. But really my focus is with the stuff that we're talking about, with the understanding that we're making reference to, it's really a matter of how do we bridge that gap between a plan and the action that hopefully will make that plan meaningfully successful?
Well,
So,
I'm just going to interject that while you don't say to people what to do, I do know that you start with acceptance of reality. I think that's very important. So laying ground on what you can, on certain things that are as they are, and starting that from there. While
mm,
you don't tell them what to choose and how,
mm,
you do highlight, the groundwork there,
absolutely.
and then from there, the consequences of the choices that they can make
Yes.
now become more predictable and
Yes.
now almost tangible. So making better choices when you can visualize different consequences quite clearly. You're not confused anymore. You're not uncertain. You actually see how certain things can play out.
Mm.
Then the choices do become mine, but they are helped by you laying down a way better horizon in front of me, right? So
100%. My intention is to try and help guide people to use what they have as well as they can. Again, if a person is going to go ahead and choose to do something that I really have a good idea is going to turn out to be an outright disaster, I don't sit there quietly and say, oh, well, I hope that that works out okay. I'll say to them, listen, I think you need to be careful about that because the reality is that this kind of activity produces this kind of outcome. And if that's a risk you're willing to run, and I'm not talking about illegal things, but if that's a risk that you're willing to run,
yes.
I'm not here to tell you not to. But I would say to you that my suspicion is you're going to run that course and you and I are going to have a discussion, whether it's 6 days from now, 6 weeks, or 6 months from now. And you're going to say to me, okay, so it didn't work out the way that I was hoping or expecting, but I learned a good lesson there. For me, again, mine is not the intention to say I know better than you, right? Or to tell you, again, what you should or shouldn't do. It's to basically say to you, here's the tool. Here's how you use it well. How you choose to implement that, really, that is up to you. And at the end of the day, hopefully, we forge the kind of relationship that allows us to discuss that in more meaningful kinds of ways. I'm always open to that. I love that even more than these kinds of discussions here in terms of just self control and mind and brain and body and all of those kinds of things.
So I can, although I said, are we going to end? I'm going to
And
probably
we've
end
done
on
well, huh?
something else. I just maybe want to bring something as a, maybe so emphasized enough, and rarely people, this is really a long haul,
Yeah, I think it's fair.
w-
It's life.
it's life. So just because you watch a couple of, just because you accumulate certain knowledge and, we watched and have this conversation and you listen to someone, it's not going to translate one to one into change in life. You really, life as it is, I mean, you're going to it takes time, self control, self regulation, definitely different, different parts of your life. Some ways more harder and some ways easier. And maybe you had better models and the environment is different. And all of these things that influence self-control are going to be played differently in the work, at home, in your health. Or so translate this takes time. It's rewarding always. It's worthy, but it takes time. And so whatever, practicing and I would say not succeeding straight away is normal. But never losing that awareness and never asking why, what happened, and having good questions and becoming better decision maker from the point where you are. I think it's amazing. I love when you and I said that I can't avoid difficult conversation with self. I
Mhm.
think that's probably what I'm always grateful. I can't hide from myself. I can't rationalize and avoid decisions that I should make. So, and being aware of what I'm right now doing and how my thoughts are running themselves against each other, or directions they're taking, and observing that and pausing quite often, that is a gift really that you get really being engaged in this for a long time. Um, but it's amazing how it's straight away it's rewarding because you have sense of control, sense of change, sense of choice. And so then in itself just start translating into, I would say, pausing on impulsive behavior more
Yeah.
and more.
So I would say to you that to take what you've said there and say that oftentimes the results They're almost instantaneous,
Yes.
but that doesn't mean that a very rapid result is sustainable. Sustainability comes from continuity. And the continuity is what I said, well, it's life. So, in many respects, the principles that you and I talk about now were applicable 30 years ago, 300 years ago, 3,000 years ago. They're applicable, for any time into the future. The point is, as we continue on the process of learning about self, growing self awareness, understanding others, understanding the reality of the world, and then applying those principles that I really say are the core of perspective for life. Keep it real, keep it simple, keep it thoughtful, keep it going. By being able to do that, the implication there is that I don't know it all, and that's all of us. And we have the opportunity to learn, which means grow a perspective both in content and understanding of what reality is like. And it's often through the failures that if I can look at those things with a sense of, I have opportunity to learn, that I can grow the kind of perspective which then gives me the ability to make better decisions because I've arrived at better conclusions, and better decisions ordinarily, when acted on, result in better outcomes. And then I say perspective for life is aimed at trying to help people do that to bring about greater stability, greater usefulness, greater productivity, living more meaningful kinds of lives, growing great relationships, ultimately, because those are the things that bring greater satisfaction in life. I love to see people happy and enjoying the many, many gifts that I believe God has given all of us. So I will put it like that and say we'll continue the discussion in terms of self-control and understanding the tool a little better. And then maybe, at a later stage in another setting, we'll discuss the underlying things that say, okay, what should guide those actions more than the kinds of things that I discuss now.
Okay, so let's make better decisions and less regrets.
I think that'll be the answer.